So I would like to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Stephen Kazan. Stephen has played a significant role in asbestos litigation for almost 50 years. He filed his first case on behalf of an asbestos victim in 1974, and since then has represented thousands of injured workers and their family members in court cases. He has dedicated the majority of his practice to representing workers suffering from mesothelioma in third-party asbestos lawsuits against manufacturers, contractors, and so forth, and in claims to dozens of asbestos bankruptcy trust funds. Mr. Kazan was honored with the Edward Pollock Award at the Consumer Attorneys of California's 2017 convention. And in relation to this conference, iMig, this year, the conference gained $100,000 from the Kazan McLean Partners Foundation to fund microgrants to iMig attendees in support of mesothelioma research. And on behalf of the organizers, I thank Mr. Kazan for that. And today, Mr. Kazan, Stephen, will be talking about the problem of shipbreaking. So, Stephen, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Stephen Kazan, and I'm going to be talking about shipbreaking and how to create accountability for the asbestos diseases caused by those activities. This is my disclosure. I am an attorney. I get compensated only from the asbestos industry, which pays my clients a lot of money for their injuries, and my clients are gracious enough to share that with me as we recover it. So what is shipbreaking? It's simply the practice of taking ships that are ready to be scrapped or recycled, driving them up onto a shoreline where they get to be dismantled by workers, usually using hand tools with minimal power equipment, and then recycling the components, taking things off the ship, whether it's dishes, glassware, beds, linens, machinery, equipment, or breaking them down into steel and other components to be used for recycled reproduction. Almost all of this takes place in third world countries in Asia, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, primarily, and is a dreadful source of environmental damage and injury to people. Going back in history, as summarized in this paper by Beckett, one can think about tracing asbestos from the mines, mostly in Canada, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, where the raw fiber is then shipped, processed into commercial products by miners and factory workers, sold for use in construction of various kinds and in other products, automotive brakes, insulation, and so forth, and then applied by workers in many different crafts to different products. Then the products get used, wear out, then ultimately get recycled, some of it into landfill, others into further use, broken down, for example, with ships, into use as a source of raw materials for steel and iron fabrication. One can expect that the workers who began to get sick decades, even a century ago, as the asbestos began to be used, would continue to get sick as more and more workers would be exposed during the life cycle of the asbestos, which is unfortunately indestructible. And causing disease for decades and decades later on as the products go through their life cycle, ending up on the beaches in Asia where workers are exposed many, many decades after the raw asbestos left the ground. This is a picture of one of the major recycling centers in Bangladesh, and you can see the large number of ships pulled up onto the beaches and in various stages of being deconstructed. The ILO has published data on the volume of ships being taken apart and the diseases that begin to develop. Of great interest is the fact that up to 7 tons of asbestos can be present on a typical ship. Obviously, the bigger the ship, the more asbestos potentially there, and is a product that doesn't really get recycled, but is in the way of getting access to the things that have value on the ship and are therefore pulled off, broken up, chopped up, all of which generates respirable asbestos dust to which the workers are exposed. Well, where is asbestos on these ships? Largely, the bulk of it would be in pipe covering, half round used on steam pipes, block insulation used on boilers, spray insulation used for fireproofing, and elsewhere. Virtually anything on a ship may well have asbestos in it. Gaskets, packing, brake linings, floor tiles, fireproof panels on bulkheads. It's all over the ships. This is just a picture of a ship's boiler pulled out of the ship, and you can see this is going to have to be taken apart by hand, generating a great deal of asbestos. To give you a better idea, on the left of the screen is an old advertisement showing the major kinds of insulation. You can see the half-round pipe covering in various dimensions, as well as the block insulation. And on the right is a picture of a marine turbine covered with asbestos. It's underneath all of the white stuff, which is basically asbestos cloth, some of it 90% asbestos or more, covered over with paint. The paint protects the equipment and also those around the equipment from exposure to respirable fiber as long as it's intact. But obviously, once the paint and the cloth under it are stripped off and the insulation broken up to get at the metal underneath, you can imagine what the mess is going to be. So where do we get from here? This is a way for the major industrial countries in the West to export their carcinogens to workers in the East, and creating a large amount of disease over the years. What can be done about this? Well, I'm a lawyer and I'm not here to talk about medicine or industrial hygiene protection, but instead to talk about legal accountability. There are maybe 50 or more asbestos bankruptcy trust funds in the United States alone. There are some more in Britain, in the United Kingdom, and these trusts pay for the damage to injured workers from all over the world, potentially, although obviously are focused mostly on domestic workers. The trusts have generally created lists of places where they know their asbestos was used. These lists are almost exclusively involve land-based sites, power plants, refineries, other kinds of work sites. But there are over 19,000 separate ships listed by trusts that are acknowledged as sources of asbestos exposure for which the listing trust accepts responsibility. In addition, there are many other sources of responsibility from companies that remain in existence outside of bankruptcy, and they are responsible for the asbestos products that they manufactured, that they sold or distributed, that their employees installed on ships, at shipyards primarily, during construction, overhaul, repair, remodeling, and so on. Access to information about these responsible parties is quite generally available, particularly in the bankruptcy trust context. The NGO shipbreaking platform creates annual reports that identify the ships and their countries of ownership and under whose flag they sail. In addition, there are many registries and databases available, some listed here, and one that I will talk about a little more, that provide publicly available information. Now, of course, with the internet, a lot of these materials are just keystrokes away for anybody anywhere in the world, or at least those who are capable of researching in English. This is a sample page from the NGO shipbreaking platform dataset that lists vessels by name, weight, flag, who owns it, and where they end up. This is here just to illustrate, for example, that the ship here, the Petros, is listed on the Combustion Engineering Trust vessel list as one where it is acknowledged that the ship had construction engineering manufactured boilers. And so anybody who has plausible exposure to dismantling the ship and to its boiler would have the basis for a claim. Here's some more examples. The Babcock and Wilcox ship site list, and that's another major boiler manufacturer, on this same page lists two ships, the Korea and the Thorn, with B&W boilers, for which that trust is responsible. I mentioned another database, the Marine Admiralty list includes over 12,000 vessels that had served in the United States Navy and related services, with extensive information. By way of example, we just picked the USS Tyrell, which was a freighter used for ferrying military supplies, as well as transporting landing crafts used in the Pacific during World War II. And this is the official vessel status card. We know that this ship had Foster Wheeler boilers. Foster Wheeler is a defendant in our civil justice system. The Halliburton Dresser Industries Trust lists the Tyrell because it acknowledges that it had pumps and valves on that ship. The Tyrell itself was built by the North Carolina Shipbuilding Company in Wilmington, North Carolina. It went through a variety of name changes after it left military service. It was sold to Pacific Far East Lines, named the California Bear, and then the America Bear, renamed the Green Lake, then the Oceanic Cloud after a couple of sales, and ultimately was sold for scrap to a Chinese company. This is another of its official cards, showing again much of the same data and listing the names on the back. This information is available, and it's all now online, and permits one to track the ship. Obviously, Wikipedia has a page for virtually every vessel, and here's a summary of this ship's history. It deals not only with the original construction by North Carolina Shipbuilding, but it also says that the ship was converted at the Key Highway plant belonging to Bethlehem Steel Company in Baltimore, Maryland, United States. And then later on, after the war, it came back to the United States and went to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington State for additional repairs, where again, more asbestos products were in all likelihood installed. So where do we go from here? Well, there is hopefully change afoot with increased regulations to diminish the future hazards once the ship's already out for demolition and recycling are disposed of. But since there's a very long latency period for asbestos disease, and particularly mesothelioma, one can expect that there will be disease for another 40 or 50 years into the future from work that has already been done on these beaches in Asia. What can be done about it? Just a matter of developing the adequate ship history for those who are exposed and become sick. It can be done, and since we know which ships went to which sites and approximately when, hopefully there are people at those work sites who have kept some kinds of records about when ships were there, and workers who later become sick can go back or to their medical supply providers, perhaps to unions or other social organizations or non-governmental organizations who can collect some of this data and identify the ships on which they had their exposure. For the American bankruptcy trusts, literally almost any exposure is sufficient to justify a claim. The dose-response relationship for mesothelioma doesn't require much of a dose, and so identifying any exposure can be sufficient. Please feel free to email me at this email address. We are happy to work with physicians and non-governmental organizations to help you all take care of the legal aspects of this problem for your patients and for citizens of countries wherever they are located. Thank you.